Have you ever woken up next to someone and suddenly realized you don't know who they are? That's what it felt like. A slow, sickening realization that the man I had shared my bed with, planned my future with, poured my love into, was a stranger wearing a borrowed name. My name is Amara. I've never been one to fall fast. I'm cautious, logical. Some would even say guarded. But when I met Daniel at a book launch party 2 years ago, all of that caution flew out the window. He was charming but not pushy. Smart but humble. He listened when I spoke, and when he looked at me it was like I was the only person in the room. He told me he worked in tech, ran his own startup, and had just moved back to the city after living abroad. We talked for hours that night. By the time he walked me to my car, I had already memorized the way his smile curved slightly to the left and the deep dimple that appeared on only one cheek. He asked me to dinner the next night, and I didn't hesitate to say yes. 6 months later, he had a drawer at my apartment. A toothbrush beside mine. A spare key on his keyring. We talked about marriage. About kids. About moving to a quieter neighborhood where we could start fresh. He brought me coffee in bed. Kissed my forehead before every business trip. Told me he loved me so often I stopped wondering if it was true. And then one rainy Saturday afternoon I pulled the thread that unraveled everything. Daniel had gone out to meet a potential investor, or so he said. I stayed home, curled up on the couch, organizing some books for the shelf he had promised to mount for weeks. I noticed a thick envelope wedged behind a stack of old magazines, half forgotten. I wouldn't have touched it if it hadn't fallen to the floor. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside were documents. Old letters. Printouts. A couple of folded-up IDs. I sat frozen as I pulled them out one by one. One had his photo, but a different name. Then another. And another. None of them said Daniel Cole. One ID called him Jared Evans. Another said Marcus Hill. And the last? A passport. Fern. Dated. With a completely different face. And yet unmistakably him, just younger and with a different haircut. My throat went dry. My hands shook. I kept flipping through the stack, hoping, begging, for some logical explanation. But with every page it got worse. Rental agreements from different cities. Bank statements under aliases. Emails from unknown accounts. All neatly tucked away behind a bookshelf he never bothered to organize. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. He came home 2 hours later, soaked from the rain. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. He looked at it. Then looked at me. And just like that, his entire demeanor changed. Gone was the warm, thoughtful man I thought I knew. He didn't ask how much I had read. He didn't deny anything. He just exhaled slowly like someone had let the air out of him. I was going to tell you eventually, he said. Eventually. My voice cracked. How many names do you have, Daniel? Or is that even your real name? He flinched. It's complicated. Make it simple. He sat down across from me, but it was like looking into the eyes of a stranger. The truth is, Daniel Cole doesn't exist. Not officially anyway. I used that name to start over. After everything. After what? I could barely breathe. A failed company. Lawsuits. Debt. My reputation was ruined. I had to disappear for a while. Reinvent myself. So you used me as part of your cover story? His silence was deafening. I stood up, the envelope clutched in my hand. How many other women have you done this to? Amara, please. I love you. No, I said firmly. You pretended to love me. Just like you pretended to be someone you're not. He reached out for me, but I stepped back. That night I packed a bag and left. I didn't cry. Not at first. I didn't call my friends or vent online. I just shut down. The kind of shutdown that only comes from heartbreak layered with humiliation. I had fallen in love with a ghost. A man who built a life on lies. And as I stood in my friend's guest room, staring at the suitcase on the floor, I promised myself something. I may have been fooled once. But I wouldn't let this break me. Because while he was out there building identities, I was about to rebuild me. And this time, I would make damn sure everyone knew my name. There's a specific kind of silence that follows betrayal. It's not peaceful. It's loud in its own way, echoing inside your chest, bouncing between memories and what ifs until you can't tell what's real and what was ever true to begin with. That's where I lived for the first few days. In silence. My friend Simone tried to talk to me. She offered food, movies, distractions. But I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. All I did was think. Not just about him but about me. The woman who had loved so deeply, so completely, and been so blind. I kept replaying moments. That time I found a key fob in his coat pocket that didn't match any of our cars. He said it belonged to a rental. The time he got anxious when we bumped into someone he claimed was an old colleague, but never introduced me to. The trips. The vague stories. The unexplained calls at night. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. Or maybe I wanted love more than I wanted truth. One morning I woke up before the sun and stood in front of the mirror. I stared at myself, my swollen eyes, my messy curls, the quiet grief that sat on my face like war paint. Who are you now, Amara? I whispered. That question stuck with me. I didn't want to be the girl who was lied to. The woman left behind. The victim. I wanted to rewrite the story. Not for him but for me. I started by pulling my life back together one piece at a time. I went back to work. Not just physically but mentally. Emotionally. I threw myself into every project, every deadline, every pitch. And the more I worked, the more I remembered who I was before Daniel ever existed. Smart. Focused. Unstoppable. People noticed. My boss gave me a raise within a month. Then came a promotion. I was leading our marketing division faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Daniel, or whatever his name really was, started calling. At first I didn't pick up. Then the emails came. Long, desperate paragraphs about how he made mistakes, how he never meant to hurt me. How he fell in love with me for real. That he was trying to clean up his past. That he wanted to build a new future. With me. I didn't respond. He even showed up outside my office once. Standing there with flowers like a man who'd simply missed date night instead of detonated my entire sense of reality. I walked right past him. That day something shifted in me. It wasn't just strength, it was clarity. Daniel didn't love me. Not truly. He loved the safety I gave him. The shelter. The clean name, the stable life, the woman who believed in him enough to cover every hole he refused to patch himself. He was never building a life with me. He was building a lie around me. And the second I stopped holding it up, it all came crashing down. One evening, Simone and I went to a networking mixer for women in tech and marketing. I didn't want to go at first, but she insisted. You need to be seen, she told me. People need to remember who you are. He was right. That night, I met influential women, potential collaborators, even a few investors who were curious about an idea I'd quietly been nurturing. My own consulting agency. Focused on branding women-led startups, helping them gain footing in competitive markets. The idea had lived in the back of my mind for years. But Daniel always told me, startups are risky, babe. You're better off with stability. Now I realized he feared my independence. Because if I built something for myself, I wouldn't need him. And nothing terrified a man like him more than a woman who realized her power. I went home that night and sketched the full plan. Within 6 months, I had filed the paperwork. 9 months later, I launched True North Strategies with 3 clients, 2 interns, and a lot of late nights. And on our 1-year anniversary, we hit our first $1 million in revenue. And that was just the beginning. Still, I never spoke about Daniel publicly. Not in interviews. Not on panels. Not in features. But I knew the industry was small. Word travels fast. And eventually he came back again, only this time in the form of a business inquiry. One of his new ventures was struggling. He had pivoted from tech to branding and couldn't gain traction. His company reached out to mine for help, apparently not realizing who they were contacting. And there in my inbox was his name. Or rather, one of his names. The subject line read, "Collaboration opportunity, urgent." I stared at it for a long time. And then, with the calmest hands and the steadiest heart, I wrote back. I don't work with ghosts. Then I hit send. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood taller. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving the storm anymore. I was the storm. People talk about closure like it's a final conversation. A face-to-face moment where everything gets said. But closure, real closure, doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it comes in silence. In not responding. In deleting the message instead of decoding it. Sometimes, it comes when you realize you don't need anything from the person who broke you. Not even an apology. That's the kind of closure I gave myself. After that email, I expected to feel shaken. Triggered maybe. But all I felt was peace. Daniel no longer had any power in my world. Not over my emotions, not over my identity, and certainly not over my success. That realization was the final nail in the coffin of the version of me who once needed his love to feel worthy. I didn't just survive him. I evolved past him. My agency, True North Strategies, started gaining attention. We weren't just helping brands, we were rewriting narratives. Telling real stories for women who had been overlooked, silenced, dismissed. Founders who had been told no 1,000 times, now getting yes on their own terms. Women like me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl Daniel once manipulated with half-truths and fake promises. Now helping women all over the country turn their voices into power. Every interview I gave, every stage I stood on, every brand we helped build, it was all a piece of my healing. One night, about 2 years after I'd last seen him, I was invited to speak at an award ceremony. Not just attend. Headline. They called it the Women Who Reshaped the Industry Gala. Even just hearing those words made my throat catch. I wore an emerald green gown. The same color Daniel once told me washed me out. But that night, it lit me up like fire. When I stepped onto that stage, the lights hit me like sunlight. And for the first time, I wasn't nervous. I didn't feel small. I didn't wonder if I was good enough to be there. As I was. I took a breath and told my story, not just the professional one but the personal one. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I spoke about deception. About being emotionally manipulated by someone who crafted lies better than dreams. About rebuilding after betrayal. About reclaiming yourself. I looked into the sea of faces and said, sometimes you're not broken. You're just being redirected. And when people underestimate you, let them. Their doubt can't stop your destiny. The applause was deafening. Later that night, I stood by the bar, drink in hand, when a man approached me. Amara. I turned. It wasn't Daniel. But it was someone who knew him. A man named Tyler. An old college acquaintance of his, apparently now working in PR. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, he said. But I heard your talk, and I think you should know he's still telling people you were the one who ruined his life. I raised an eyebrow. Still blaming me for a life he faked? Tyler gave a tired smile. That's what con men do. They rewrite history until they believe it. He paused. But don't worry. Most of us know the truth now. I nodded, not because I needed validation, but because it felt good to know that even lies have expiration dates. That night I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply went home, took off my heels, and sat on my balcony beneath the stars. And I realized something. The old me would have wanted revenge. Would have wanted Daniel to feel the same pain he put me through. But the woman I had become? She didn't need revenge. She had something better. A life he'd never be part of. A success story that didn't include him. A name that now meant something, not because he gave it weight, but because I did. It wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. The next morning, I got an email from a women's leadership council asking me to become a mentor. I accepted. 2 weeks later, I was asked to write a column for a national business magazine. A month after that, my agency was featured in Forbes as the branding firm changing the game for women founders. Every step forward was one more thread stitched into the fabric of my comeback. And Daniel? He faded. Slowly. Quietly. No explosions. No scandals. Just irrelevance. And maybe that's the greatest justice of all. Not when they're destroyed in front of you, but when they have to watch you thrive without ever getting close again. I never told my story to hurt him. I told it to free me. And in doing so, I gave permission to countless other women to free themselves too. There's something strange about watching a ghost walk into the room. It was a networking brunch in Midtown. One of those events with cold croissants, lukewarm coffee, and forced smiles. I was seated near the front because I was scheduled to speak on the second panel. I had just taken a sip of coffee when I felt it, the prickle at the base of my neck. I looked up. There he was. Daniel. It had been over 2 years since I saw him last, and in some cruel twist of fate, life decided to drop him at the same event I was headlining. His hair was shorter, his suit a little wrinkled, and the confidence he once carried like a shield? Gone. He froze when he saw me. Our eyes met across the room, and for a second, it was like time collapsed. But not in the romantic cinematic way. It was cold. Hollow. He approached slowly, cautious, like he wasn't sure if I'd slap him or ignore him. Amara, he said with a hesitant smile. Didn't expect to see you here. I didn't smile back. I'm a panelist, I replied simply. Why are you here? I was invited, he said, scratching the back of his neck. Trying to get back into the branding world. He was trying. That part was clear. His name had been quietly blacklisted in a few circles I'd heard. A few clients he'd burned. A podcast interview that backfired. The man who once sold dreams was now struggling to sell reality. How's that going? I asked, tone even. He sighed. Not like before. It's different now. I nodded. Yeah. It is. There was a beat of silence. Then he said the words I somehow knew were coming. I just wanted to say, I've changed. I tilted my head slightly. And he blinked. And I thought maybe we could catch up sometime. That was when I felt the laugh rise in my throat. Not out of cruelty but disbelief. You lied about your name, your job, your life, I said softly. You watched me pour my soul into a future you never intended to build. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand to stop him. This isn't hate, I continued. I'm not angry anymore. But I'm also not curious about who you are now. Because the version of you I once loved never existed. His smile faltered. His shoulders dropped. And for the first time I saw him, not as the charming man I fell for or the manipulator who broke me, but as someone entirely unremarkable. He wasn't a villain in a movie. He was just a man who thought he could rewrite reality with charm. I turned back toward the stage. Panel's starting, I said. Take care of yourself, Daniel. He didn't follow. He didn't try again. He just stood there holding the weight of a conversation he couldn't flip in his favor. I stepped onto the stage and shared my journey with a new crowd of founders, creatives, and dreamers. This time I didn't hold back. I talked about emotional fraud, about rebuilding your sense of self after being shattered by someone you thought you knew. And after the panel, something happened I didn't expect. A woman in her 40s came up to me, eyes glassy. I was married for 12 years, she said. Only to find out he had another family in a different city. I thought I'd never breathe again. But listening to you, it felt like you gave me my voice back. That was the moment I knew. My story wasn't just mine. It was for every woman who had been gaslit into silence. Every woman who blamed herself for someone else's deception. Every woman who thought being broken meant being finished. I started writing a book. Titled it The Lie That Built Me. It was part memoir, part guide. And it hit bestseller lists within weeks. But that wasn't even the victory that meant the most. The real win came quietly one afternoon when I was speaking at a university panel. I looked out at a room full of young women, eager to shape their futures. One of them raised her hand and asked, "What would you say to the version of yourself that first met him?" I paused. Then I smiled. "I'd tell her she's going to lose something she thinks she can't live without," I said. "But on the other side of that loss is a version of her so powerful, she won't even miss what she left behind." I walked off that stage lighter than I'd ever felt. I didn't need Daniel to admit what he did. I didn't need an apology. Because every time I showed up for myself, every time I helped another woman reclaim her voice, I rewrote the ending he tried to give me. And if you've ever been lied to, left behind, made to feel like your value was tied to someone else's love, know this. You don't need closure. You need to rise. There's a peculiar silence that follows survival. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear, but the kind that blooms when you've outlived the version of yourself that once begged for the bare minimum. I used to wait for Daniel's texts like they were oxygen. Now his memory didn't even sting. It was just noise I had outgrown. After the book, everything shifted. I started receiving invitations to speak on bigger stages. Corporate conferences. Women's leadership retreats. They didn't just want to hear about the scandal, they wanted to hear about the comeback. I didn't hold back. I talked about the dark days. The nights when I cried into my pillow questioning my worth. The mornings I stared at my reflection wondering if I'd ever trust again. I told them how I rebuilt my name when the one tied to me had been a lie. And every time I spoke, women came up to me with stories of their own. A betrayal here. A divorce there. An engagement broken off by someone who couldn't handle their light. It was like looking into a mirror lined with scars, and each one shimmered with resilience. That was when I knew what I had to do. I launched Project Phoenix, a mentorship collective for women rebuilding after emotional trauma. We started with 15 members. Women from different walks of life. Artists, teachers, nurses, small business owners. We met virtually every week, peeled back our layers, rewrote our stories. Within 6 months, we grew to over 500 women. We didn't just talk healing. We funded businesses, launched nonprofits, rebuilt credit, negotiated better salaries. We didn't whisper anymore. We roared. And then came the award. I was nominated for Woman of the Year by a leading media company. I almost didn't go. Something about awards made me feel awkward, like I was stepping into a space meant for someone else. But then I remembered who I used to be. I remembered the woman on the floor, gripping a contract Daniel forged, sobbing into nothing. I remembered her silence, her ache, her confusion. And I went for her. The event was held in a high-rise ballroom overlooking the city skyline. As I stepped onto the stage, the room fell quiet. I looked out and saw my mother crying in the front row. My best friend, Tasha, clapping so hard she nearly knocked over her wine glass. And in that moment I spoke not as a victim, but as the woman I fought to become. I was once told that love could be a lie, I said. But healing never is. This award isn't for the woman I am today. It's for the girl who once believed she was too broken to be seen. The applause was thunderous. But it wasn't the peak. A week later I got a message on Instagram. From Daniel. It was short. 4 words. I'm sorry. You won. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I felt anything for him, but because those words confirmed what I already knew. He was watching. He saw everything. And somewhere deep down he knew the truth. The woman he tried to bury had become the woman the world couldn't stop talking about. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because I wasn't living for his recognition anymore. I was living for every girl who still believed she wasn't enough. Every woman who was told she was too much, or too soft, or too loud. Every voice that had been silenced by charm wrapped in deceit. And in building a life I was proud of, I gave those women permission to do the same. So to anyone listening, if you've ever been lied to, if someone ever tried to rewrite your story with their betrayal, remember this. They don't get to define your ending. You do. And sometimes the greatest revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be. The last time I saw Daniel wasn't in a courtroom or on a screen or in some dramatic confrontation. It was in a coffee shop near the university almost 2 years after everything. I didn't plan it. I was meeting a publisher to discuss a second book. My first had done so well they'd offered a memoir deal. As I stepped inside, juggling my laptop and an oat milk lot, I froze. There he was. Alone. Hair slightly grayer. Posture less confident. His shoulders slumped forward as if the weight of his choices had finally settled in. Our eyes met just for a second. And in that brief flicker of recognition I saw it. Regret. Not just for being caught, but for losing someone he never really valued until she stopped needing him. He didn't stand. He didn't speak. He just nodded once and looked away. Me. I smiled. Not out of cruelty. Not even pride. Just peace. I walked past him and never looked back. That was the end of his chapter in my life. And the beginning of something even greater. I published the memoir. The name I chose. It was raw, honest, unapologetically mine. And it wasn't just about him. It was about rediscovering who I was without someone else's shadow dimming my light. It climbed bestseller lists, inspired a documentary, and turned Project Phoenix into a global initiative. I built something lasting. Not just for me but for every woman like me. I bought a house in the hills. Not to flaunt, but to breathe. To sit on the porch with a cup of tea and know I made it here on my own terms. Some nights, I lie in bed and think about the girl I used to be. The one who almost signed her whole future away for a man who only saw her as a prop in his performance. He was so patient. So loyal. So scared. And yet, so powerful. He just needed time to remember. So now, whenever I speak, whether to a packed room or through pages of a book, I remind the women listening. You are not what he did to you. You are not the lie they told. You are not disposable. You are the fire they tried to contain and failed. You are the storm they thought would pass quietly but never did. So when they try to reduce you to a footnote in their story, rise. Write your own chapters. Speak your name louder. And let your success echo where their words once tried to silence you. Because healing isn't just surviving. It's thriving in front of the ones who said you never would. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your voice matters, and your story isn't over yet. Let's rise together.